you for listening to the Ally Networking Podcast. You can catch many more resources, events, and fun career advice on highlightnetworking.uk, our Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and much more. This was the last episode of season 2, but we have many amazing interviews from season 1 and all of season 2 for you to revisit while we prepare season 3. So stay tuned for more. Thank you for listening. Stefanie Sword-Williams, welcome to the Ally Networking Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to speak to you.
And I'm very excited to have you on board because I'm a big fangirl. So I want to get into everything that you've done and how you've built your iconic Fuck Being Humble brand, tagline, everything in between. But before that, we need to know a little bit about you. So could you tell us, how would you describe what is it that you do and where you're from?
Sure. So I am the founder, author, and public speaker behind Fuck Being Humble, which is an online platform and event series that helps people be unapologetically proud of their achievements. I originally set up Fuck Being Humble as a side hustle 3 years ago now. It's actually our the 3-year anniversary this month, I think. And the goal was basically to teach people how to self-promote, because I just feel in so many different situations, we need it, and we're just so often not taught how to do it effectively. And so it's something that I really wanted to use all the experience I had from working in the advertising industry. And rather than working with brands, it was more for me about how I could apply my storytelling expertise to helping individuals tell their own personal stories in order for them to grow their careers. So that's sort of a bit about what I do. And then in terms of where I'm from, have a bit of a mixture of what I've done. So I would say my home is Leeds, but I was born and grew up for a few years in Spain, in Madrid. And then I also lived in the US when I was younger. So I've traveled quite a lot, but I would say my base has been Leeds, which is the north of England, if you haven't already been able to tell by my accent.
I could never tell accents. I feel like it's very difficult for foreigners. There's so many accents in the UK, considering that it's not that huge of a country.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's actually fair.
And I get really confused with where people are from. I mean, when I was younger, I lived in the Lake District, and I remember going to Liverpool and asking for directions, and I could not understand what they were saying.
Liverpool is a hard accent to understand, to be fair. That is not an easy... I mean, I, as a northerner, still would have to take a double take with what Scousers say, so I wouldn't worry too much. I think that's something most of the UK would struggle with, to be fair.
But I love that, and you are such an amazing public speaker. I've seen some of your events and panels that you delivered for Fuck Being Humble are so good. So I like to know how it all started, of course. So can you just remind us, what was your first job?
Sure. So I'll tell you. So I obviously had 2 first jobs. My very first job ever was working in a shoe shop when I was age 16, and it was essentially, selling shoes to people, which I like to talk about because I definitely think there were lots of learnings there of, how to approach people, how to upsell, how to make people feel comfortable, how to make them feel confident. There were a lot of things that go into essentially selling shoes, which at the time I probably didn't process. But as I've gone through my career, there were definitely moments where I learned the importance of how to build those relationships and how to, sell additional products, or how to, like I say, make people feel comfortable, which I think have definitely been intertwined into the way I approach things now as an adult. And then my first job, say, in the ad industry, which was, the career once I'd left university, was working for a very small marketing and branding agency called Liquid Agency in Nottingham. So I'd studied in Nottingham and I got a job straight out of university, which was quite a few people had actually managed to do that. It was quite a tough time to get a job. And I was a brand and marketing exec, and my role was kind of everything. Because I did a lot of Photoshop and InDesign, I could create mood boards and do graphical stuff. but I was also really interested in marketing and branding. And I actually did a lot of workshop-based stuff in my very first job, which is interesting now that that's where I've come back to, because I actually really loved doing that, which was sort of helping brands understand what their purpose was and why they're doing what they're doing, how to align their visions. I was always sort of taking notes, and some opportunities I got to do some workshops, but generally it was my boss at the time who led those. But I definitely got like really good first-hand experience on how to run workshops and how to work with people in those sorts of situations. So yeah, I always find it quite strange that sort of 7 years later, I'm back doing that. And it's obviously something that I really cared about.
I agree with you that when you do like customer facing roles at any point, because it teaches you so much.
Absolutely.
And, like, you probably have to work with people at some point in your life. So it's good to know how to deal with them from an early age.
It's so true. And also on my degree, we had to do a lot of group work. We had to do a lot of pitching and presenting and working with people you didn't necessarily like that much. And all of that sort of hands-on learning is definitely my style of learning personally. That's how I understand things. That's how I practice things. So yeah, it was almost every sort of work experience I had definitely has helped me build up to where I am today, for sure.
Were you always very confident about yourself as like a professional woman?
I get asked this question all the time. Obviously, when you run a brand like Foot Being Humble, it's going to create those questions. I would be lying if I said I hadn't always been described as a confident person in my friendship groups or in my family. I think I was really lucky that I had very supportive sort of parents and family. My dad in particular has been my biggest sort of cheerleader since I could walk, sort of thing. He's very biased as to how wonderful me, my sister and my brother are. But I think, that nurturing from home was obviously really important. But I also think as I went through my career, I'm very open with the fact that I moved jobs 6 times in 7 years. And each time it was because I wanted more. I was putting myself forward. I was taking risks. I was moving cities. I was joining startups. I was taking on 2 roles instead of 1. I was putting myself in situations where I didn't necessarily always have the answers, but I was really excited by that. And so for me, I think, yes, I think I've always had a level of a good foundation of confidence in myself. But I also think I've done a lot of things in my career that have pushed me to become more confident and have encouraged me to take more ownership of my successes, or have meant I've had to advocate because I've interviewed more, or I've loved public speaking, so I have to understand how to present myself. So there are a lot of things that I think go into making an individual confident. And for me, I think it's always been my ability to say yes to things and try things and put myself forward for things, even if they didn't necessarily go the way I wanted them to. Each time it's helped me to identify that I am capable of sort of doing things I didn't always expect. And I think that's something I try to talk to a lot of people about that's really important, is you'll never know your potential if you only ever stay in your comfort zone or stay in your lane. And I think I am someone that every week, every month, every year, I'm always trying to push myself that bit further to see where else I might be able to extend my skills or build my reputation.
There's something to be said. Like, if you are someone who learns by doing, you kind of have to go put yourself into those situations, because how else are you going to feel like you're evolving, right, and develop?
Absolutely. And I think it's exactly that thing of, you have to sort of see it to believe it. They always say that, but I think you always have to see it to believe it yourself. It's not just about seeing role models. I think you have to see, well, if I could do that and I didn't have any skills, maybe there are other things I can do that I don't have skills in, or I'm not perfect at just yet. So yeah, 100%. Every time I do something where I feel like I'm actively putting ideas or thinking or learnings into practice, that's when I start to evolve as an individual.
Yeah. I'm interested to know about you. You said you moved jobs quite a few times, which in my mind and my vision is quite normal, to be honest, in the creative world. But were you always able to frame that well for other people? Like, how did you frame your narrative? Because I feel like this is where people get stuck a lot, on how they talk about where they're coming from and what they've learned and why they want to go somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, I always had this, somebody once said to me, you should always feel like the shittest person in the room. And if you don't feel like that, you need to change rooms. And this is not to say I always felt like the most exceptional person in the room, but I think the scenarios and situations I went into, because I have always had this, I'm going to go for it attitude, or I'm going to give it a try. And it generally seemed to pay off, or I proved that I was capable of doing things. I got to a lot of situations or points where I felt like the room for growth was limited for a variety of reasons. And I suppose I wasn't necessarily scared of having to have that conversation and discuss that with employers. So when I was going for new jobs and interviews, I was very open with, I really see potential in me growing into this role or into this level. I just don't think I have the opportunity to do it in my current job, or, you know, I want to make sure that I'm constantly growing, learning, pushing myself and building my skills. And I'm afraid that that environment isn't able to enable me to do that, and being really transparent with that, because a lot of people understand that there are toxic workplaces, you're limited by how many levels there are in your role, or maybe there's 7 other bosses you'd have to overtake before you could get to that point. You know, like, it's not as hard to discuss that as it sounds. I think people are scared to do it, which is totally fine because you're worried. But I always used to make the joke with employers, like, between 16 to 18 months is when I get itchy. And like, as long as you keep me fulfilled and keep me excited and I want to keep working here, I'll stay. But that my track record is that I do generally move on. And I wasn't maybe as transparent upfront saying that, but I was very kind of like, I want to feel excited and I want to feel like coming to work is something that keeps me going, and I want to feel engaged. And I sort of was quite confident in saying that to businesses, that that's how you retain me as an employee. And that's sort of why I never really shied away from having that discussion. And actually I think quite a lot of businesses liked that, because essentially they could see my appetite and they could see my hunger. And I think in every job that I went to, I always delivered 110%. I always went above and beyond, and they got what I said in the interview. You know, they saw how I wanted to grow, and the ones that kept me on for the longest amount of times were the ones that nurtured that.
I love that. I think this is such good, actually, like, advice in a way. As someone who had to hire lots of people in my life, I've always wanted to know the person's ambition, because I feel like that helps you as well as an employer to define, well, that person will fit in here because they want to grow with us or whatever, like, you can see where they want to go. And that's always a lot. I feel like for a lot of employers, I can't talk about all of them, but that always made me really happy when I knew that they had specific interests that we can nurture as well, because that usually makes for really good employees, because as you said, then you do a lot more if you're motivated.
Absolutely. And I did a webinar earlier today, and I sort of said to people, like, it's up to you to go in and make your interests heard and noticed and seen, if you want to craft your role around what you enjoy doing the most. So when I worked in advertising at a previous agency, I started running Foot Being Humble events and loved events. And I was like, this is something I really want to do. So when it came to Mental Health Awareness Week, I said to my boss at the time, look, we're not using the space downstairs as like a gallery space. Do you mind if I put on an exhibition? And he kind of looked at me and was like, I'm not going to give you any budget. I'm not going to give you any extra time. I'm not going to give you any resources to do this. I was like, that's okay. I just really want to do it. Like, I'm really passionate about mental health awareness, and I really want to put on this exhibition. And he was like, go for it. And I did that. And we got about 100 people came through, and it was a really good event, and it worked really well. But why that was so important for me was that actually the next time we ran events in the business, I was the person that people came to, because I was open with showing that ambition of what I wanted to do and integrate the aspects of my hobbies and my interests into my working life and conversation. And I think actually that is something, providing there is business value that a company can gain from that, if it's just that you want to do a sewing club or a knitting club, they may not be as excited about it. But if there are ways that you can demonstrate the business value of integrating your hobbies and interests into your job, then there's absolutely no reason why a company wouldn't embrace that and they wouldn't want to try and empower you to do so.
So wait, so you started running this event. How did the whole fucking humble idea came about? Give us, I know it's been 3 years, but give us a bit.
Yeah. So I moved to London 3.5 years, or 4 years ago actually, which is 4 years ago. And from Manchester, which, you know, in Manchester is kind of like one networking event a month, or there was when I was there. It was nowhere near as fast paced as London in terms of the amount of networking events or pop-ups or exhibitions that were going on. And when I came down to London, I was just so inspired by all these incredible people I was meeting at events and cool pop-ups in Shoreditch or exhibitions. And I was just really fascinated by seeing all these interesting people. But something I recognized was at the same time I was networking a lot for my business and the company that I'd moved to London to work for. It was a 3-person business, myself included. I was their first employee and I was working in new business development. I was a senior account manager and I was a producer. So I had three jobs in one. And when I went to these networking events, I just constantly saw very male dominated panels, over the age of 50, very expected people and very expected voices. And as a 25-year-old from the north, as a young female, I didn't feel I connected with them. So I was sure that lots of other people there weren't really connecting with them. And I wanted to find a way where I could, one, make networking not shit, and two, share stories of people that were actually doing really interesting things that maybe wouldn't get the opportunity to speak about themselves and for another 30 or 40 years, because our system is based on the fact that you need to have been doing something for 30 or 40 years before you're considered an expert. And from a very personal perspective, you know, like I said, I moved jobs 6 or 7 times. I had lots of experience to share personally, but I knew I wasn't going to be invited to speak on events because I wasn't a founder of a business. I didn't run a platform. I wasn't an MD. Like, I knew that for as long as I worked in ad agencies for other people, I would probably never really get that opportunity. So when I created Foot Being Humble, I really wanted to try and create this space where we could celebrate emerging talent, but also educate people on how they could be those voices, how they could be an inspirational person, how they could be a role model, how they could get on these stages, whilst also kind of creating a stage for myself. So I always say I wasn't getting invited to speak on stages, so I made my own stage. I spoke and I created a movement around Foot Being Humble and the mission that I was trying to go on with that. So there are lots of different things. And also for me, lots of my friends would come to me for advice around professional development because I did move jobs regularly, because I did work in advertising, which was pitching and selling. I understood interviews. I understood how to craft portfolios, CVs. You know, I had a lot of knowledge on this. So I kind of knew if my friends needed that help, there was talent that was currently not being invited to speak on panels, and they definitely should have been, and I had my own experiences, then there was a really nice way to bring that all together. And so I originally just started by creating an Instagram account and posting on there. And the objective for me was only ever to run events. Like I said, it was only ever to make really cool environments where we could meet, connect, and celebrate other people. And very quickly into launching it, I was approached about writing a book, and I was kind of like, no way, this is not for me. And then, yeah, it really organically has grown to the point where this time, March 2020, I quit my job and I'm now running Foot Being Humble full time. So it was a side hustle for 2.5 years, and now it's my full-time business.
That is amazing. I know you told a few times that also like you had all these things lined up and then COVID hit and you had just become a freelancer, which a lot of us probably found themselves, you know, self-employed in the same situation. What was your, was there a turning point or a turning moment that you're like, okay, now I'm ready to do this full time?
a lot of people came to my events within, the first 6 months and was like, so are you going to quit your job and start working on Foot Being Humble full time? And I kind of was like, no, like I love my job. I love working in advertising, for as long as the places I work fulfill me and serve me, then I'm not in a rush to do it. And I think it's one of those things, like I'm always a bit hesitant when people like set goals, set ambitions. I like to say it as set dreams, because I think goals put on a lot of pressure that you need to achieve something by a certain point, or you need to quit your job in 2 years, or whatever it is that you're telling yourself. But for me, when I started Foot Being Humble, I think maybe I was quite modest in what I was expecting it to be, which was just cool events in London. Like that was honestly at the bare essential of what I wanted it to be, was just meeting really interesting people. And that was it. So when it came to it building very quickly, to be honest, I think I was still in that mindset of this is still just a side passion project. I don't feel the need to jump into this just yet. I'm really happy with work. And at the time I was doing some really cool stuff in terms of running events for my business as well that I worked at the time. So I came up with a new business strategy where we talked about brand activism, and we ended up going to New York and Paris and Cannes Lions Festival. And we did like a global event series, and we got projects from Marc Jacobs and huge brands all over the world off the back of it. So things were going really well. I think what the turning point, actually really for me, there were a couple of things. I wanted to go down to 4 days a week because I wanted to spend a bit more time on growing Foot Being Humble. The book was coming out in May 2020, or it was meant to, but then COVID hit and it got delayed until September. But so many opportunities started bubbling around the book. So I was getting booked for talks in Copenhagen and Sydney and Amsterdam. And in my head, I was like, there is no way I can physically make this work around work. And I'm not sure I want to, because the burnout would have been so intense. And I was already feeling it, juggling so much. I'd just written my book in 8 months alongside a full-time job in advertising. Like I was tired already. So I think for me, it was realizing that I love advertising. I loved my job. I'd got to a really good point in my career. But if I didn't give this a go and really throw myself into Foot Being Humble now, I'm not sure if I would have done its service. Like, I'm not sure I would have done it justice. So I really wanted to just give it a try. So I sort of left the job and decided to go for it. And yeah, I lined up business like everyone tells you to. I had 6 months worth of work, and within 2 weeks, it was all gone because of COVID. So, and my book got delayed by 4 months, and I had to do all the launch remotely, and there were no trips to Amsterdam or Sydney, and all of those very exciting things came crashing down quite quickly. So I think it was definitely right mindset, right time, and this thinking in my head that I wanted to make sure I gave Foot Being Humble the kind of credit it deserved, and really threw myself into that launch and that next stage of growing the platform. But, there were things that didn't necessarily pan out how I expected, but it still has been an amazing 12 months, and I've grown personally, and also the business has grown exponentially, to be honest.
That is amazing. I think this is really interesting. And in a way, deciding to say no more for this job that you had 9 to 5 was, it was the way to say yes to everything else that could come, right? And at one point you kind of have to try, because we can't do everything at all the time. It's like, for some reason, a lot of people like to ask me if people can have it all, as if I have any of what people consider it all. And I tend to say like, well, I'm pretty sure you can kind of have it all, but at different times. Maybe not all at the same time forever, I don't think you'll hit a perfect balance of life and you stay there. Like, yeah. That doesn't really exist.
For sure. And like, I always knew, like, I'd worked in advertising for 7 years. If I needed to go back, I could go back. Like, I think we fear that, if you quit your job and go to run a business, if it fails, it's like, oh, it'd be mortifying having to go back into advertising. And for me, it's like, well, that's what I've always known. So if things dry up, I'll just get a job and, life will be fine. I kind of owed it to myself to give it a go and try and believe in making it work. And I suppose for me, so much great stuff had happened by it just being a side hustle. So I kind of knew in my head, I'm only physically able to give it a very small percentage of my time, and it's already done so well. So imagine the possibilities if I give it 100% of my time.
Steph, I'm interested to know, you said you grow your business, of course. So what are some things that you think you've developed or that you made better in the past year? Were you working on how to deliver talks or workshops or creating new content? What were some things that you were learning in the past year?
God, I feel like I've learned so much over the past year. You know, for me, I'd been working in ad agencies for 7 years and I was used to working with people. So working alone was a big step for me. And I love talking to people. I love bouncing ideas off people. And, you know, particularly during lockdown, it was difficult because the only person I could speak to essentially was my boyfriend. And he has been amazing, but there's only so much support he can give me, and he's not necessarily in my industry. So it is difficult for me to constantly look to him as my mentor or business coach. So I think learning to go with my gut, and in so many different ways, of like not feeling like I had to over deliver every single time, or not feeling like I had to be incredible at social media when it wasn't really my job, and kind of, giving myself the permission to know that I'm doing the best I can, but it is just me, and that's okay if not everything is perfect and not everything is at this expert standard. You've got to, you know, just get used to doing all of these things, and whatever I do is good, and not everything has to be incredibly perfect straight away. So that was definitely one thing. I think from a business perspective, over the 2 years of running Foot Being Humble as a side hustle, I'd written 3 talks and I delivered them for two years. So I'd never written any new content, and I was really lucky. There was obviously a demand. I was able to sort of ride the wave of those products essentially. Mm-hmm. But once COVID hit, I needed to relook at, and the fact that, you know, this was now my full-time business, I had to think about, well, what are my revenue streams? What is the business model? Who am I speaking to? And in this past year, I've written I now offer 13 different workshops. So I've created 10 different products, and they take a lot of time to think about. And every time I write a new workshop, I'm like, is there anything left in my mind to actually even say anymore? But every month I learn something new. Every sort of day I see a new trend or a new insight or a new behavior that I could create something around. So creating new products is definitely something that I have had to really invest time in. And a lot of that is really observing what people are going through and what they need when they need it. So I created a side hustle school, which is a 4-week course to help people grow side hustles. Why? Because last year, everybody was assessing their lives and going, I don't think I want to do what I want to do anymore. And I've helped over 300 people launch side hustles now. And, you know, I think although it's daunting, you're like, you know, blank canvas, what products do I sell? Listening to what people really need has been so rewarding in a way, because you see it in the uptake in people attending my events or coming to my webinars or workshops or courses, is that actually the demand is there as long as you're listening to what people need. And yeah, absolutely. Public speaking, video content is something I've really pushed myself. I hate pre-recorded video content, and I don't think I'm very good at it. But I said to myself, I kind of vowed to myself at the start of this year, I don't want to be the person that misses out on a revenue stream just by saying, I don't do that or I don't like it because I've tried it once and I didn't think I was very good. So the past 6 months, I've really pushed myself to try more stuff, say yes to more paid opportunities, and I've really noticed myself improve. So I think it's that thing, isn't it? Like the older you do get scared to push yourself to try new things and do these things. But each time that you do, you're opening yourself up to way more opportunities. So yeah, I think kind of not allowing myself to say that isn't for me, and actually going, well, how can I get better at that? Or what would make me feel like this could be for me?
I love that, Steph. Thanks for sharing that with us. And I didn't know about the side hustle school, but that's fascinating.
Yeah, it was amazing. I originally started it for students. I called it More Than a Grad, which was essentially to help students create something for themselves at a time where the job market was failing them. Mm-hmm. Companies were reducing job opportunities. And actually, I think when you leave universities, they'll say like, oh, they're just a graduate. And I think they are more than graduates. So I originally wrote the 4-week course for students. And then I had such a positive response. People said, please, can you open it up to any age the next time round? So I did. And next month, I'm actually delivering it to Manchester Met University. I'm running it for their students. So it's really nice that a product I made last summer that was filling a seriously bad industry problem and societal issue and impact we were having from the economy is actually still now a usable product and service that I can work with institutions or businesses on, like universities.
On that note of listening to people, what is the one thing or one barrier that you see people are dealing a lot with?
So many different things. I mean, I get asked every single day, how do I manage imposter syndrome? How do I self-promote without looking arrogant? How do you not compare? How do you believe in yourself when you've been rejected? The list goes on. I think definitely over the last 12 months, it's been a lot about perseverance. A lot of people have been asking me, how do you keep going? Like, how do you manage a side hustle and a full-time job? How do you bounce back after an interview rejection? How do you keep applying when no jobs are being offered? All of this resilience, perseverance, constant self-belief. It's draining for a lot of people. For most of us, we're expected to have that at certain points in our career. You need to have a really strong sense of self-belief if you're interviewing for a month, because that's generally how long it takes, or, a bit longer for some, but we're used to it being shorter time frames. But given what's been happening, it's obviously been a longer strain and also the emotional impact of what's been going on in the world. So I've really felt for a lot of people, and I too have been going through it myself and trying to navigate how I do that, and then sharing as much advice on the techniques that are working for me is something I've really tried to do for others, particularly on my Instagram at F being humble LDN. It's like constantly trying to think of the things that, what do I get pushed back on all the time, and what do I know that my friends are struggling with as they apply for jobs, and really trying to create content that helps people around those things. But I think imposter syndrome is something that doesn't seem to be going anywhere ever. Yeah, definitely this feeling of doubt as we go through sort of uncertain times.
I have to say that I had never heard the term imposter syndrome until last year when I opened the applications for the first mentoring round, and 100% of the applicants complain about that. I was like, oh, I wonder what that is. And it's crazy. And I agree, there's been, obviously, the job market hasn't been the same in the UK specifically, where before the level of unemployment was a little better than it currently is. So quite a big shock for everyone, for me included, because I also lost my job in the pandemic.
It's been so difficult for so many, and I think that's one amazing thing that I've seen, and you'll have seen the same, of like how, first of all, willing and open people are to help during this period, but also how kind of grateful people are in return for that support.
We're going to pick your brains a bit here then, Steph, so they can give some of your amazing insights to everyone.
Sure.
What is the worst career advice you've ever received?
So my personal one has always been, I remember very early on in my career, I felt like quite a creative person, but I went into client management, and I let somebody who was quite influential in my life at the time tell me, no, you're good with people, stick at that. You're not that creative. Like you stick at working with people. That's where you really kind of come alive. And I know that at the time they were saying it from a genuinely kind of helpful place, but actually letting somebody else dictate what I should or shouldn't be doing, or what I was best at, wasn't up to that person. And I suppose I feel like I went down one route and really kind of went for it and did well in that role in client management. But the reason I was always looking to run events, or the reason I was growing Footbing on the side, was because I wasn't getting that creative fulfillment that I wasn't able to achieve in my role. And I think now one of the biggest pieces of advice I would give to my younger self, or I give to younger people, is don't let other people dictate what you are capable of, in the sense of, if you want to try multiple things, you try multiple things. You've got your entire life to specialize, to find your niche, to do things in a really specific way. You may not even want to do that, but if you do, you can do that whenever you want later down the line. The more things you try earlier on, the better understanding you will have of what really makes you tick and what really motivates you and what really gets you out of bed every day to do your work. And yeah, just not letting yourself be influenced in a certain way because of other people's perspectives or preferences, or maybe even agenda, to be honest, and actually just knowing yourself what you enjoy doing. And you can only really do that by trying lots of different things.
I love that. You also did a little Clubhouse chat with me a while ago with another friend, and you dropped lots of bombs on this specific question, but I will ask you again. Don't kill me, but it is on brand. So, Stef, what's your best networking tip?
For me, when it comes to networking, so I used to go to networking events 3 to 4 times a week. I was honestly at every type of event you could think of, I was there. One of the things that I learned really quickly on was I would walk into networking events, be so eager to pitch myself because that was the point of me going, that I wasn't really listening to what people were saying to me. So I am quite an outgoing person. I am quite confident. I am happy to drive the conversation. But in some cases, I was almost overdoing it, overselling. And actually, what I'd say to people is, if you've got an agenda, if you've got a goal, the best thing you can do is listen first and sell later. So the idea is that you ask lots of questions and you actively listen. You don't think of ways to butt in and talk about yourself. You don't think of ways to turn the conversation around into your services or how you might be able to help. You genuinely ask questions that will help you at some point pitch to that individual. Doesn't mean you have to do it right there in the room, but it's something that the more information you have, the more tailored you can pitch yourself back to that person. The quicker you jump in and pitch yourself, you could do yourself out of an opportunity or out of a job or out of a collaboration because you haven't taken the time to listen to someone. So I think that's definitely one of my biggest tips, is just make sure that you're actually engaging with people and listening to what they have to say and what they really need, and not just going in with your own agenda on what you want to get from the session.
I couldn't agree more. I always tell people, I feel like this kind of thing of pitching yourself too fast, etc., and not really listening to the person. It's like someone saying oh my God, I hate reading. And then you're like, well, I actually sell encyclopedias. You should buy it for me. This is what usually gives networking a bad rap, whereas it can be a lot lighter than that.
There are so many different ways you can networking, and being a salesman isn't the only version of that. And I think we have to do a lot of work to challenge people's thinking about it, because I think so many people miss out on the power of networking because they assume it's not for them, or they're too introverted, or they're not confident enough, when actually I think some of the best networkers I see are introverts. And I think using titles or labels like introverts and extroverts just limits people's perspective on what they believe they can achieve versus what they're actually able to achieve. So that would be my other little tip, is don't let the fact that you see yourself as a quieter person or someone that's less salesy as being a bad thing, because actually you'll probably do a better job than those outgoing salespeople that are running around talking about themselves.
All right, we're almost at the end, I promise, Stef, but I have a few more questions for you, okay?
Sure.
What is something you spend a lot of time doing that you didn't anticipate you would?
Oh, it's a really good question. I think definitely one stream is social media. I think anybody who runs a platform or a side hustle or a business will know how much energy goes into posting every single day. I've literally, that's what I've been doing today, mapping out my content, and it's a bit of a hard one because it's such a useful thing, and it's how I wouldn't be here without building my brand on Instagram. Like, it's been 100% how I built word of mouth, how I've built success, how I've opened doors. It's been such a great thing, but obviously with that, there's loads of things: social media fatigue, comparison, wasting time on my phone, constantly looking for validation, all those things that come with it. So I think social media has been a huge, huge instrument in the growth and the performance of Foot Being Humble. And I spend a lot of time creating assets, creating things to go on those channels. Is definitely something that I spend a lot of time on. But then I'm also really proud of it. I've never put paid advertising behind Foot Being Humble or the posts that I create or any of the content that I've put out. So when I see the content performing well, it shows that actually me putting in that time and energy is really important. I think another part to what I do, for me at the moment, it's obviously giving a lot of workshops and webinars. I do a lot of corporate bookings, which a lot of people don't necessarily know about me for doing that. So I did a talk last week for Kate Spade. I've done it for MNC Saatchi recently. My clients literally range from like Unilever to Microsoft to Google, the British Red Cross, Bumble, like so many different businesses, whether that's live Q&A talks with me, workshops, like training. There's so many different ways that I work with businesses and brands. But I think that sometimes people don't know that that's mainly sort of 80% of my business. That's how I function. The rest of it is obviously building the community online and running community events as frequently as I can. But there's a lot of things that go on in the background that maybe not everyone sees me doing.
Thanks for your honesty, Steph. I always find it really interesting, and I'm glad when people say it, because a lot of what we do is not, like when I started working with talent and musicians, a lot of people assumed I had a very glamorous life, and I was like, I carry a lot of stuff, guys. Like, it's kind of like a good workout more than anything.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, cool. And Steph, I think you'll figure out that this is how we're going to wrap up. But why is it important that we say, fuck being humble and go for it?
The reason, and we actually haven't necessarily even got onto this the entire podcast, so I'm glad that you've asked this now. I think the reason I say fuck being humble, and I think it's really important for me to state, I obviously believe in being humble, obviously believe in humility. What I hate to see is when modesty overtakes opportunities in front of us. So when we think that it's cooler to be self-deprecating or to talk ourselves down instead of hyping ourselves up or bigging ourselves up, that's where the problem comes in. And the way I like to encourage people to use the sentiment fuck being humble is the next time you're in a meeting and you really want to speak up, but you're not sure if you should, you say, fuck being humble. I can do this. I deserve to speak. The next time you're at a networking event and you meet your icon and you've always wanted to speak to them and you are so obsessed that they're even in the room, you go up to them and in your head you say, fuck being humble. I love this person. I deserve to speak to them. I'm their number one fan. They should know about this. So it's really about using it as that permission to do whatever it is that is in front of you, whatever it is that you have a bit of self-doubt on, a little bit of imposter syndrome. Maybe you've not got loads of experience in this area yet. Just reminding yourself that you've got to where you are for a reason, and you have to take those moments of appreciation and self-reflection to really digest all the amazing work you're doing. And I think when we don't do that, that's when we have really sad, miserable, resentful careers. So the more you can self-reflect, the more you can seize those opportunities, the happier you'll be, and actually the less you will compare yourself. I think fuck being humble as a statement is really useful for comparing yourself. When you say like, oh, am I good enough? It's like, fuck being humble. Yes, I am good enough. I could post that too, sort of thing. So yeah, I think it's just so important to help you get out of your own head and get out of your own way, really. It's that whole thinking of no one wins when you play small, especially not you.
I love that. And that's the thing, like, if you don't advocate for yourself, no one else will.
100%.
So it's like you feel the fear and you just do it anyway, because nothing else will happen if you don't.
Exactly. And like I say this at a lot of my workshops and events, is that like, you'll be more disappointed waiting for other people to see you, because if they don't, you'll just feel like you're not good enough. So learning to validate yourself and acknowledging when you've done a good job and telling people when you've done a good job and taking pride and accepting praise, they're all really important steps to build up your confidence. I think it's something when we are so reliant on other people's permission or acknowledgement, then we're not able to give it to ourselves. So I think just let go of that need to be validated by everyone else and just learn to validate yourself.
Steph, this is amazing. So many gems here. Okay, tell everyone how they can get more of you and actually maybe watch some of your full webinars and get the full Fuck Being Humble experience.
Yeah, so you can actually head to fuckbeinghumble.com/shop, and there are a couple of webinars available for purchase. I also try to run webinars sort of once a month, so absolutely keep an eye out for our events page. There's a CV product available in the shop, so if anyone's applying for jobs, you can download our CV product. It's £20, but it's got all the advice you need. And also just keep an eye out on my Instagram, because I always announce events. Last month I did an event for Puma, which was Fuck the Fear and Do It Anyway. So you can actually still watch that. It'll be available soon as well on my IG. So just keep your eyes open for that. But just make sure that you're connected with me on LinkedIn and you're following me across socials, because I always try to share as much value as possible, even if it's not in the event formats. It's trying to create content and assets that you can use to help yourself, and sign up to our newsletter as well, because I always try and send out some goodies in there as well.
I was going to shout out your newsletter for you if you didn't do it, because I am a big newsletter fan. I subscribe to so many, it's insane. But I recently you sent a newsletter recently-ish, and just for context, we are recording this on the 1st of June. So I don't know when people are going to listen to it, but it was amazing because it had like email templates to like negotiate.
Yeah.
Or something. It was incredible, so useful. Also, it's so beautiful. Everyone should subscribe. Very great stuff. I really am a sucker for a nice newsletter, and your like branding is really beautiful and exciting, and it sounds like you on the page.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I really love it. So yeah, everyone go follow Stef. And thank you so much for doing this.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me. It's been so nice to catch up and chat finally. And yeah, I'm a big fan of everything you're doing. So I'm excited to see all the amazing stuff I Like Networking continues to do.
Thank you for listening to the Ally Networking podcast. You can catch many more resources, events, and fun career advice on ilightnetworking.uk, our Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and much more. This was the last episode of season 2, but we have many amazing interviews from season 1 and all of season 2 for you to revisit while we prepare season 3. So stay tuned for more. Thank you for listening.